Welcome to Quantum Conversations, where we explore the energetics of healing, from frequencies to metaphysics, technology to astrology, from science to nature. Everything is energy, even you. My mission is to help you feel empowered to take your health back into your hands. My hope is that you will open your heart and your mind to a universe full of possibilities and join me for this healing exploration. Let's discover a new dimension of wellness together. Please note the information provided in this podcast, Quantum Conversations, is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. This episode was so fun, and I'm really excited for you to hear it. While I was at the Dragonfly Health event in Boulder, I sat down with Ian Mitchell, the wizard himself, and we chatted about all things biohacking, innovations in wellness, consciousness, and quantum tech. Ian is the lead scientist at Wizard Sciences. He's a scientific advisor for Leela Quantum, the chief scientific officer at Redbud Brands, and the advisor at Satori Neuro. Check out this brief list of his accomplishments. Over the past decade, Ian has developed a series of novel therapeutics using lipofullerenic conjugates and holds multiple patents across a host of different scientific disciplines, such as nanomedicine and materials science. He holds joint patents with the University of Tulsa for viral inhibitors, cancer screening technology, and personalized cell structure media, as well as an antiviral therapeutic for recalcitrant viruses. Ian recently developed the first viable, get this, gamma ray shielding system for use on spacecraft and space habitats, as well as carbon negative concrete to inhibit greenhouse gas proliferation, like you do. He also likes long moonlit walks on the beach and strives for world peace. And that is a quote from his bio. Nothing better than having a chat with a brilliant scientist who doesn't take himself too seriously and truly just wants to help people. If you're into nerding out on the science of biohacks and quantum tech, this episode is for you. All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Quantum Conversations. I am here with my new friend, Ian Mitchell of Wizard Sciences and many other names and accolades behind his name, I'm sure. I am so excited to have him on. We have already been talking at length about things all quantum and consciousness and David Hawkins. And so this is going to be a super fun episode. We are here at the Dragonfly Health event. So if you're hearing any background noise, there's quite a lot of other activity going on. But Ian, thank you.
Sounds like square dancing outside.
Yeah, for joining us. So let's just introduce people to you, who you are, what you do, and what is Wizard Sciences?
So I am a person. I work as a scientist, and Wizard Sciences is kind of an outcropping of my desire to do the best health things I could think of. So the kind of just using some of the molecules that I've worked on for the past decade plus, kind of leveraging those into different serums and therapeutic agents to help people's health. And most of it, admittedly, is kind of specifically focused. I kind of worked on mitochondrial health and things to modulate that. Because to me, it seemed like the place where I could get the most effective dose in the smallest packet. So if you work on things at a very subtle level, then those things have a tendency to cascade up, and it becomes more and more impactful as it goes. So I found that if I worked on the subtleties of the electron transport chain in the mitochondria and how they were producing energy, that I could take out a lot of issues. And some of the things that are kind of interesting, like when you work on mitochondria is now considered to be kind of an ancient bacteria that we formed a symbiotic relationship with inside the cells. That's my understanding of it too, and that's kind of how if I were going to say I knew, that's what I would say, is that's accurate. And so one of the things that I kind of am able to ameliorate for a lot of people is autoimmune conditions, because autoimmunity, I think in the next probably decade, people will realize is kind of a misnomer. That what's actually happening is when you have bacterial DNA inside the mitochondria, you get 16,569-ish different genes mitochondrially. And those things are bacterial genes. So when you lose power in your mitochondria, it's kind of got almost an electric fence, if you will. And when the power drops in that, it allows spillage. So genetic material spills out. So you have bacterial DNA perfusing through your cells. And then hence your body goes, oh my God, we have all this bacterial infection going everywhere. And so it launches an assault, and all these macrophages come in and start breaking things down. But it's kind of a misnomer because it's not actually autoimmune. It's actually foreign bacteria in terms of how your body perceives it. So it's acting on itself. And I think in the next decade or so, people will realize that's probably the case. But that's kind of one of the things that I've been working on is like, it's kind of sadly rampant in our culture where people have issues with autoimmunity. And I think the reason for that is because when the electrical potential drops inside your cells, you allow that kind of translocation beyond the membranes. And when that happens, people just get really ill. So I'm just trying to fix stuff like that. So I have serums for the body, for the brain, and things like that.
Awesome. Yeah. Very cool. So beyond Wizard Sciences, what is your background? What kind of a scientist are you?
Well, I work in chemistry, physics, biochemistry, material science, quantum physics, a whole bunch of different things. And I'm just probably overly curious. Yeah. So, and I taught senior biochemistry at university, and that was kind of fun. But most of the kids were going off to med school. I don't think many people were really that interested in biochem. They were pretty much wanting to go to med school. And so I just tried to make things interesting for my students and instill a sense of creativity in people, because it's unfortunately, that's one of the things I see is the way our educational system works is not terribly conducive to creating people that are very informed and very curious.
Yes.
And so I would try and kind of push that a bit in people. And I do the same thing in my own company. So I just try and keep people thinking. It's a lot of the areas where we work, like the work I do with Leela Quantum. We design experiments and come up with things and do double-blind placebo-controlled trials on things that a lot of people think are just absolutely wackadoo. But to me, it's the next frontier of science, and a lot of times when you work in those arenas, people think it's just quackery, but that's always the case. Is when you're at the very cutting edge of things, you're going to get panned about it, but somebody has to do it, and then 20 years later, people go, yeah, well, everybody knows that.
Right. Yeah.
and that's fine. I genuinely appreciate that I have to think and that I'm not, like able to just go, oh, Google, and look up all the answers. And that's because some of the things I do, the results that we get are vexing. You're totally confounded. You go, well, how the hell does that work? Like, I didn't think that would do that. Yep. And then you have to work backwards and go, okay, well, if this does this every time I test it, obviously there's something there. And I use the analogy a lot, but it's really like sometimes in science, you have to remain agnostic to what the data is, right? Like you'll get data, you process the data, and you pull the thread and you follow it where it takes you. And, if you were bouncing a ball and dropping it, and you drop it 1,000 times, and 999, it drops and hits the ground, and the 1,000th time you drop it, it hovers. Well, you don't go, oh, statistical aberration, kick it out. You go, what just happened? Now let's pull the thread on this. And so that's a lot of the things I do is where we find anomalous results or anomalous data sets in something, we go, okay, let's isolate that. Why is that happening? And then we go deeper into that and keep trying to figure it out. Because like in the case of like the quantum companies I consult with, we don't have a quantumometer, right? It's too subtle for big sausage finger critters to understand. So we have to look at all the peripheral things. So we look at blood work and like how does this affect ATP production? We use spectroscopy and all the standard tools that I would use in the university. Like that's what we do to assess what's going on. But you have to think about it in different ways because you're not looking at a primary function. All we're looking at is like either secondary, tertiary, quaternary effects of things as they cascade down the road. So it's kind of like piecing together a mystery, like I got this result, what happened? And then going to the next level. And so we're sort of peeling the onion of material science and trying to get from the material through the energetic to the atomic to the subatomic and then below that. And most of the stuff we're working on is dealing with things that appear to be below that level. And it's fascinating because some of the experiments we've done show that there's, quantum connectivity and things, and entanglement is, typically what you hear as the term. but we've demonstrably shown that in biological systems that we can affect things hundreds of miles apart in a very pronounced way, consistently in double-blind trials. And it's, it sounds very strange, but that's just, the truth is the truth.
So in that type of a study where something is being affected from hundreds of miles away, are you doing like blood cells in a petri dish and separating them, or how are you doing that?
Yeah, cell cultures in petri dishes blinded with, like in the case of the experiment I'm thinking about, we were looking at ATP production. And so it's very easy because you can plate, a couple million cells, and then you plate multiple plates, and then some you treat, some you don't treat, and you're treating them from a distance. So in the case of the one experiment, I took pictures of the cells that I wanted to be treated, then had the professor who was plating everything plate them and put them in the incubator. And I sent the pictures to the group who was going to charge the cells, quantumly charge the cells, which were the guys with Leela, a couple hundred miles away. And so no one other than myself knew which cells were which. Everything was, completely blinded to both groups. And when the data came in, I had all the readouts done on the ATP rates and the production, and it's pretty simple because you can put it in a luminometer basically, and it just, you use specific compounds like luciferases. In this case, it was a thing called cell titer glow, and you put it on, and the only time it expresses is if there's been ATP production. So you can very accurately gauge, and like photonic scale resolution. So you can see exactly how much ATP you produce with a very very high degree of fidelity. So we'd look at that. And then, I kind of, after I had the data, then I'd unblind it so everybody could see it. And everybody kind of goes, wow.
Yeah.
It's
how could you not?
Well, you see literally an immediate spike in the treated cells and bumps up between 20 and 29%. And it's an immediate correlation. And the rest is stochastic distribution is the term we use, where there's just kind of a normal distribution curve of jumps. But it's really more like one looks like little bitty waves and the other looks like these huge tsunami-sized spikes. And it's just fabulous. Because you show, the thing that's impactful to me is it shows two things, right? If you can pull back and say, okay, I'm not going to approach this as a scientist. I'm going to even pull back a little farther, just approach this as someone who's here, just kind of a human looking at this. What you realize really quickly is there's connectivity between things that isn't inherent. It's expressed all the time, but it's not inherently visible. You don't notice it, but every thought, feeling, emotion, everything that you have, there's sort of an electrochemical physical correlate to that, right? When you think something, there's a potentiation in a neuron. Well, that propagates a wave. That wave will cascade in perpetuity forever throughout the entire milieu of this whole place. And so it's kind of like looking at multiple interactive waveforms that overlap. And sometimes you get constructive interference, sometimes you get destructive interference. So the biggest takeaway for me is that everything is connected, and you have to be very, very careful with what you think, what you do, what you say, not necessarily in that order, right? So it's kind of the thought, word, and deed, right? Deeds are very easy to control. Like you don't walk up and push somebody. Words are a little bit harder. You have to make sure that you're kind with your words. Thoughts is where people usually kind of let themselves go, right? They still have ill intent with regard to other people, and that's not so good. But it's gradations, right? You hope that people don't fight. Then you hope that people aren't verbally mean to one another and abusive. And then beyond that, you hope that their thoughts are genuinely good and kind towards everybody. And then beyond that, everything is kind of connected. So, just watch your P's and Q's.
Yeah. Okay. I need to go into this study with, you took a picture of a Petri dish, and then you took the Leela Quantum device and you charged the picture of the Petri dish. So the Petri dish never even saw the light of the Leela Quantum block. And I need our listeners and anybody watching to really listen and hear what we are saying here, that it was a photo of a Petri dish that was placed in the Leela Quantum block, but the Petri dish and the cells in it were impacted and the ATP production increased. Y'all, just try to wrap your head around that for a second.
It took me a bit.
Yeah, and that reminds me of some of Lynn McTaggart's work, where she has groups of university students set positive intentions for pictures of plants that are like the students are in Australia and the plants are in California, and the plants that they look at on the pictures grow bigger and stronger than the ones that were not.
It's almost as if everything is connected.
Almost. I mean, you would think that there's like some invisible, like quantum level thing going on there. I love it.
Yeah, it really is. Like Luc Montagnier's work, he was a Nobel laureate who isolated the HIV virus and got the Nobel Prize for it. And I think that his later work, he spent about 15 years working on water and memory storage in water. And a lot of people thought, Montagnier's a quack, and they just kind of put him in the corner because they couldn't avoid the fact of going, well, but he is also a Nobel laureate. So it's obviously, he's an MD, and his work is really remarkable. But he did a similar experiment that I remember the very first time I read about it, I thought, hang on, I've got to reread that because it makes no sense. So he took someone's DNA that had HIV, put 1 drop of their blood in water, then diluted it tenfold, then took a drop of that, and then put it in another thing and did a tenfold dilution. I think that's 7 times. So then he ran a spectral analysis on it, and it shows just pure water, right? Because it's the effect of the equivalent of putting 1 drop in the oceans of the world. And so it's basically at that point how we would analyze it with some sort of like HPLC or something. It doesn't read out as anything other than water, right? If you put it in a gas chromatograph, all it's going to say is water. Then he would record the frequencies coming off the last test tube using this high fidelity recording array, make a wave file, transmit the wave file to the Polytechnic Institute of Italy, 1,000 kilometers away. They would then play it into a completely separate vial of water and add a polymerase chain reactor to it, and it would rebuild with over 98% fidelity the genetics of the drop of blood.
Oh my gosh.
that I remember, I think I probably read through that thing 3 or 4 times where I was like, what is happening?
Yeah.
It kind of blows you away because you're like, wait, but it was just water. Now to me it's a lot more easily understood because you go, okay, water doesn't actually, it's not just random, H2Os with the, the bond angle between them. It stereoscopically stacks itself. So it's really like a liquid crystal. So what are crystals great at? Storage. Like that's it, in even electrons. Actually, there's a field called Spintronics where you can store data in the way we normally would with a 0 or a 1, but just do it by left spin or right spin or up spin or down spin of an electron. And that too it's a very subtle thing. But my guess would be, call me crazy, this is kind of like the who wore it best. Nature always wears it best. So we've figured out a lot of these things like, Spintronics, we can use spin of electrons to store information. Yeah, nature's probably been doing that for billions of years. And some of the like information on the cloud, if you read Rupert Sheldrake's research, showing that different animals seemingly upload changes in information that they learn to a collective somewhere. And on opposite sides of the planet, those groups have been able to take, this group learns this thing beyond a certain threshold. This group is born with that knowledge. And it's, I think that's the, like the cloud.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, real quick. This feels like a good place to check in and let you know that I only ever promote products on this podcast that I have personally tried myself for extended periods of time. I purchased NeuralRx from Wizard Sciences to help with brain fog, mental clarity, and memory. I am very aware of how my body responds to new supplements, and this one started detoxing my brain on day 1. I hit it a little too hard like I usually do, and I could feel my lymphatic system working to drain the junk out of my head. By day 3, I was incredibly focused. 1 week later, I could remember why I was walking into a room, and several weeks in, I am shocked at how much memory and ability to retain information has improved. I simply mix it in my coffee each morning. Honestly, I could drink it straight. I really love the taste. This has a new permanent place in my supplement lineup. So be sure to check out my affiliate link and code for 10% off. Okay, let's jump back in.
We need to circle back to C60.
Sure. That's a great one actually, because truly what C60 is, in my understanding, most people think about it in the kind of the macroscopic way of saying, it's an antioxidant molecule and it wedges in between the inner and outer mitochondrial membranes. True, it does do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a tangible expression of what I think is actually going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a whole lot more subtle effect that's actually really what's causing the very pronounced effects and beneficial things that I've been able to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
But from a biochemical standpoint, you can just look at it and go, yeah, okay, so it's located transmembranally, and it's passed through the outer, and it's wedged in between the outer and the inner, and it modulates oxidative stress load, and so it increases the electron transport chain. Yes, it is doing those things.
Mm-hmm.
But is that really the impactful part? No, probably not. Probably, if I had to hypothesize, what I would say is that it actually acts as a tone resonator, and it increases the fidelity of your own DNA, so that the expression of who and what you are is more pronounced and solid.
Wow.
So the solidity of the expression of you as a being becomes more of you.
Wow. Okay, so C60, for people who don't know, is carbon 60. Does that mean that it's 60 bunches, pieces of carbon?
So carbon is kind of interesting. So it's just carbon is an atom, but in this case, this is an allotropic form of carbon. So you've got diamonds, graphite, fullerenes, and this specific one is a fullerene, but it's different carbon configuration. So diamonds are these little tetrahedral sorts of things, that little stacked pyramidal structure, and then you've got graphite and graphene, and graphene is kind of like a honeycomb layer, single atom thick, and fullerenes are these little clusters. And so in this case, it's a truncated icosahedron, which is this little 60 clustered with 60 different vertices, and it's a combination of hexagons and pentagons. And for anyone who's wondering what a truncated icosahedron is, it's a soccer ball.
Oh.
So
okay,
that's the it's a football. That's the fancy, like, for everybody else in the world, it's a football.
Awesome.
So it's just made of carbon atoms. So very small soccer players.
And this is what your product line then with Wizard Sciences is based off of.
Yeah, primarily. Most everything is that. And we've got some new things that we're about to do where I've been kind of breaking down water and making changes to water. It's also a really fundamentally good thing. So you can use molecular hydrogen and oxygen to do different things. So I'm trying to broaden impact just by virtue of things that people can do that they already do on a daily basis, right? If you pick up a can of water and you drink it and it greatly impacts your health, terrific. And I'm doing my job.
Yeah. So I know you have several different products of C60, and they do different things, or they're geared towards different people with different issues, or
So what I found is when I first started working on it, carbon 60 is hydrophobic, so you can't get it to go into an aqueous system, which doesn't work really well since we're effectively aqueous systems. So if you bind it to a lipid, you can get it to move into the body and move through the cell membranes. And that's what I was shooting for. So I realized that the body, in kind of its brilliance, handles different lipids different ways, right? So you metabolize long chain fats one way, medium chain fats another way, short chain fats another way. And depending on the specific one, they'll move to a specific region of your body to do a specific thing. So in the case of heart health, I use a combination of myristic, palmitic, and palmitoleic acids, right? And the reason I use that combination is, and this was a serum I made specifically for people that had heart issues, namely my father, because he had a massive heart attack, and I was trying to figure out how to rebuild his heart the most effective way. So carbon 60 works on blocking reperfusion injury. So basically, when your heart stops and the blood isn't moving, it starts to oxidize, and when the blood comes back in, it's kind of like a scouring pad, and it rips things apart. You get this kind of mass oxidative effect, and it rips everything apart. And so reperfusion injury. So you can block that with the C60, but I couldn't really affect the muscularity of the heart, and so much of it was damaged. So I ripped off some research from the guys that were in Boulder, and they were actually at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and they were working on pythons. And it was kind of really, really brilliant research. Hopefully it comes to market at some point, but I went ahead and just came up with a natural analog of it, because I'm sure they're trying to synthesize it. But basically, when you use that combination of triglycerol fatty acids, they found 100 kilogram python can fast for an entire year, and then it can kill and eat 100 kilogram deer. The problem is, because its body's basically been in stasis, it doesn't have the capacity. So it emits that combination of triglycerol fatty acids into its cardiac tissue, and they go through a process of rapid hypertrophy. So it grows 40% in 24 to 72 hours.
Oh my gosh.
So
wow.
If you can imagine, so somebody my size who's like, say, 200 plus pounds, that would be the equivalent of putting on 80 pounds of muscle in 1 to 3 days.
Wow.
It's a pretty rapid shift. And I thought, well, this will be good. So I made a combination to do that, because those fats, your body in its infinite wisdom moves to that spot to affect change. For general health and for autoimmune things, I bound it to oleic acid, which is extra virgin olive oil. It's a primary fraction of extra virgin olive oil. And so that is a long chain fatty acid. So you digest it and your body shifts it to a lot of skeletal muscle into your joints. For people with Alzheimer's, I developed one thing called Neural RX. And so that I bound to caprylic acid, which is the C8 chain. So it's one specific chain of medium chain triglycerides. So you've got C6, C8, C10, and C12. Really, 2 of those biologically act as medium chains. The other 2 are really long chains, even though for marketing purposes they're called that. And C6 is capric, and it's as the name implies, goaty, and it doesn't smell so good. But C8, if you get a really good triple filtered refined C8, not really much smell, not really much taste, and it hits your liver, fractionates, become ketone bodies, and then it moves to your brain. So I linked the nanoparticles to that so I could get them moved to the brain, and then, much like I do with a lot of the preparations, I looked for, in this case, Alzheimer's, what do I need to do to completely eliminate this condition, right? And so the very first thing I do is I look at the problem with a fresh set of eyes. I thought, okay, what is this thing? Why does it exist? How does it function in nature? And what I came to at the end of the day was, well, this isn't a disease. This is a protective mechanism. And so what I looked at is you have this kind of lacy band around your midsection called the omentum, O-E-M-E-N-T-U-M. And the omentum is this band where if you eat something that's going to skew your blood pH, your body very tightly controls that. So it will take things like, say, if you have too much sugar and your acidity starts to skew, it will actually wrap those things in a little fat packet and sequester them on your omentum, which is why in the West, most people's omentum is little plump. It's because we have a very acidic environment that's very high in carbohydrates. So because of that acidity, because our body tries to regulate the pH, it laces that border around our midsection. So when I was looking at Alzheimer's, I thought, oh, okay, I get it. This is a protective mechanism where your body uses, whether it's endogenous or exogenous threats on your brain, it just sequesters them in tau proteins and beta amyloids and then just kind of neatly tucks them away. The problem being, as you get older, you have this compounding effect of, say, different systems having issues, right? So your brain actually cleans itself with a thing called the glymphatic system. And so your glymphatic system only opens up while you're asleep. And it's truly a pressure washing station. So it uses interstitial fluid and cerebrospinal fluid, opens the channel, and it actually is in a hydrostatic way. It pushes interstitial and cerebrospinal fluid into your brain, washes, and then pulls them back out, and they're perfused out via your lymph. Well, as you get older, you literally have less pressure in the system, so it doesn't wash the brain as well. And you've also had more time to aggregate all of these different exogenous little things and endogenous little things that are packed around the neurons. So you've got all these big boulders, effectively, that are sticky pieces of gum, and they can't be broken apart. So it's literally, the analogy I use is you're trying to clean boulders off the sidewalk using a garden hose. And the older you get, the more the garden hose gets cleaned. So I broke it down with all those components and thought, okay, I can break down the plaques using proteolytic enzymes. I can elevate the function of the glymphatic system using carbon. Then I needed to trigger production of new neurons, right? So neuronal outgrowth. And I wanted to do it at a fast rate. And as it turns out, it seems that it's able to be triggered at a rate that outpaces NGF1 and BDNF, which are the kind of 2 endogenous things that you use to pump out new neurons, at a rate of about 3 to 1. So it's pretty good. And the other thing that's really peculiar is the morphology of the new neurons that are pumped out are different. So their axonal span is 2 to 3 times larger. So they're very, very large neurons. Wow. Which is great. And it's actually, I always joke that it's like the patchwork operator, they just go around something. Because if you can't get the signal to potentiate and actually land where you're trying to get it to land, you can't think. And so when I broke it down, I just put all the components in place that I thought, okay, if I use all these components, this should actually fix that.
So with Alzheimer's, especially, I think there's so many people that either believe it's not reversible, there's nothing you can do about it. There's some things out there that are saying it's like type 3 diabetes and you need to be working on your blood sugar earlier in life and stuff. I mean, is this something that could potentially help people who are pretty late stage Alzheimer's, or something that, I mean, what have you seen in results?
Full reversal in people, and the oldest was in their 90s. Wow. And very advanced, like literally couldn't shave, couldn't cook, couldn't really speak, and going back to total function. So wow. Now, is that going to happen every time? I don't know. Mm-hmm. You know? But I do think in regard to the two questions that you kind of pointed out there, like, you know, some people, is it going to reverse? Do they think it can? They think it can't. It's reversible. I will go on record as stating it is 100% reversible. Wow. Now, maybe there's ways to do that. You know, maybe some of those are out there, but I will say definitively it's 100% reversible. Now, as to, you know, how common that's going to become, I don't know. Actually, yeah. It's not really the way the medical system in this country and in most of the world is set up. It's not terribly conducive to taking concepts of curative procedures and getting them out to the masses, because it's an economically driven system. It doesn't do terribly well when you cure patients.
Right. You know? Yeah. And I know some people who are experiencing Alzheimer's and their families, their parents and grandparents and stuff. And because of these messages that we have received for the last 100 years about senility and dementia and all this stuff, the family members almost just accept it.
Well, sure.
Well, this is just how mom is now, and she's just going to keep getting worse, and we're going to have to put her in a home. And I 1000% believe that healing is possible for absolutely anyone, for absolutely anything. So I just love to hear that this is something that you have personally been working on, because we need to change the narrative.
Well, actually, to be fair, I haven't been working on it for a few years. I stopped working on it when it started working.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's the thing is, you know, you don't carry a raft on your head when you get to the other side of the water.
Yeah.
So that thing did what it was supposed to do. So now I'm on to other things because luckily, since I'm a very curious person and I'm trying to fix a lot of stuff, there's a lot of problems.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I'm not shy of material to work on.
And I think one of the things that I first heard about you being kind of famous for is working with kids with autism.
Yeah.
And you have maybe some formulations or something that have been helping.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting though. Humans really suck at multivariate systems analysis. Like we're just not good at it. You know, if something has a single point causation, we're great. We'll figure it out. You know, the monkey with the stick, we'll get it. But when there are 15 different things that can happen at 15 different levels, and some of them are time delayed, and you know, you sow a seed, you reap a crop. The crop looks entirely different than the seed you've sown, and that's all because of the passage of time. It obfuscates things, and so I've worked with that, but I wouldn't say by any means I have made that great a dent, because there are so many different things that are at the root, right? And I always joke about, you know, Henry David Thoreau said this thing, you know, for every 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil, there's one hacking at the root. And I have consistently made it kind of a practice of mine to, you know, be the guy hacking at the root. That's the dude you want to be in this equation. Yep. But when you start working with autism, you look at it and you go, okay, well, this is entirely different than this other kid, and this kid is entirely different than this other kid. And the rates are going up. And I would say there's some very obvious things. There's, you know, Stephanie Seneff is always a big proponent of, you know, like the glyphosate hypothesis. And I think that's very true, because when you block mineral absorption, you simply can't function. But when you combine that with, you know, things that are endocrine dysregulators, and you combine that with EMF fields that shift voltage, gated calcium ion channel flow in the brain, you end up with this really complicated puzzle where no two kids are exactly the same. And that's just a generalization. There may be two kids that are exactly the same somewhere, but just in general terms, it's very tricky, because you can work on one aspect of it and then maybe isolate a second aspect and work on that, and you'll definitively see results. But I have yet to have someone that I would say is really, really advanced and then perfectly normal. Now, I have actually seen a few people that have had different things done and used different systems, and that appears to be the case. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely say I'm not the forefront. Like if I had that happen, I would refer those people to other people. I would give them the things that I can give them and say, this will handle this component.
Yeah, it's a multifactorial situation, and there's so much to unpack there. And unfortunately, it's the parents that end up being the researchers and trying to figure out everything. But let's talk about another thing that you are really focused on is like athletes and fitness. Oh yeah. And you have a formulation.
Yeah, the Olympic Serum. And that's actually, it's funny because the Olympic Serum is the one that is arguably the best for autoimmune conditions because it's in a long chain fatty acid. And it has, NMN, PQQ, CoQ10, astaxanthin, beta-alanine, all these things that really affect physical health. And so this year's CrossFit game, on the podium, I think there were 13 first place slots, and people taking my Olympic Serum took 9 of them.
Oh, wow.
So it's I always joke that it's kind of like Captain America serum because you can do these things that seem to violate all of the laws of normalcy, but when you really drill down, they don't. So basically, your brain downregulates your muscular firing to about 25 to 30% of what you can actually do. And it keeps the other part of that capacity for, fight or flight things when, I'm going to die because a boulder fell on me, so that you push the boulder off. And that's actually an example that there was a rock climber who had a rock fall off on him, and it was 1,200 pounds. And they know this because they found the boulder because he pushed it off of himself and sheared both his pectoralis major on both sides, just ripped it. But he was still able to effectively bench press 1,200 pounds. Now, would he probably do it again? Maybe not, but it's, your body has all these latent capacities that it can access, but it doesn't normally because it's too much. So in the case of the Olympic Serum, one of the things I always tell pro athletes is don't push as hard as you can because your skeletal muscle recruitment goes up. So you have the same amount of muscle, but if you can suddenly recruit 80% of it in lieu of the 25 to 30 that you normally recruit, you can throw that ball 100 yards. You can do all these things that are just ridiculous. One of the guys that actually won first place in the CrossFit Games, he called me the first day that he took the serum, and he said, "Dude, is this illegal?" I said, "No, it's not illegal." I said, it's just really good science." And he said, "Well, but like I'm retiring this year," because in CrossFit there's such a ridiculously elite athletes that 34 is the last year you can compete in the games, and then 35 to 39 I think is the masters bracket. Okay. Like the phrase, you're washed up, kid. You're 35. So you're beyond that threshold. But in his case, he said, "I just ran the fastest time I've ever run in my life. And I'm putting up numbers that I haven't been able to lift for 5 to 10 years. And that's the thing is it's not that his muscle recruitment just went up. I mean, he always had that inherent capacity, but he was just suddenly able to access it. And it's a dose dependent function. So the more of it you take, the more of it you access. So in the case of one of the other people who won first place in their division at the CrossFit Games, they texted and said, "I'm taking 4 tablespoons a day." Wow. Oh my God. It's so unctuous though to me because I still take it all the time and I have for well over a decade, but it's still grody because it's just very unctuous is the right term because it's so oily and stuff.
Right.
But I mean, proof's in the pudding. The results are incontrovertible, so I can't really fuss about that. I just kind of go, okay, and I take a couple tablespoons a day just to keep the wheels on the bus because it really does make a difference, and because of the way it changes, like the cellular outcropping, so you get so much more energy that you can just keep running, and you also need about 30% fewer calories.
Oh wow!
So yeah, it's your body. It's funny, the Olympic Serum actually works on both system loss by blocking that and actually using like NMN and NAD precursors to add things to the other side. So just on the system loss side, in the lab, we were showing 18 to 58.3% increases in ATP output. Wow. And it's not because we were adding ATP, it's because we were literally just blocking loss. So you block system loss and the net effect is you have suddenly more. But then that's just on one side, that's the loss side of the equation. So then if you stack things like NAD precursors on the other side, then you get this huge bump. So you end up with this robust energy profile where you have so much more energy than anybody else, and you can just perform at a better level.
Yeah. So is that, I mean, that's something that is then safe to take?
Oh yeah.
Over long periods of time? You don't have to like cycle it. It's not gonna.
I cycle it. I don't actually think any supplement should be taken all the time. So, and it just because your body is so adaptive that in the case of something that operates like that, it's a very strong antioxidant. If you take a very strong antioxidant day in, day out, your body will downregulate its own endogenous antioxidants. So you'll suppress superoxide dismutase and glutathione. All that stuff gets shunted because your body's efficient. It goes, oh, I don't want to waste the energy. I'll do something else. And so I tell people, do it 5 days a week, cycle off on the weekends. And that's what I do. I just do 5 days on, 2 days off.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Very cool. And so is there any other like maybe conditions that people have been using the Olympic RX for that you've seen some shifts and changes?
Yeah, sure. Arthritis is the biggest. Rheumatoid specifically, not osteo, but rheumatoid, yeah. You do that for about 6 weeks, it's gone. And that's, again, I would hypothesize that that's probably just because of the misnomer of autoimmune. Because when you can eliminate that just by virtue of increasing the electrical potential there and keeping the bacterial DNA in, you don't seem to have the same inflammatory response.
Yeah.
And everything, the swelling goes away, the redness goes away, the joint pain goes away.
Yeah. So because inflammation is coming down, and you said that it also decreases your need for calorie intake, is kind of a beneficial side effect of it some weight loss too, or
not really?
No.
Most people, even when they need 30% fewer calories, they don't eat 30% fewer calories.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things I think that all of us do is you sort of develop your lifestyle, and once you have a habit ingrained, you're going to do that thing, right? And whether it's eating or drinking or smoking or whatever, most people just have their set things and they do them. So if suddenly they don't need to do them, like if someone said, you no longer need 5 hours of sleep a night, you can get by on 3. Most people would wake up after 3 and go, God, well, what do I do? You have all this extra time. They'd probably go back to bed.
Yeah.
So just creatures of habit.
Yeah. So what are some other projects that you're working on, or new things that you're excited about?
Let's see. Well, so I have a water that's about to come out, which is we were calling it Wizard Water, but it's got a new name now, and it's coming out in the beginning of next year, and I'm very excited about that. So it's a super oxygenated water, and so when you drink it, which is especially perfect for here in Boulder because we're up so high, when you drink it, your pulse ox goes to 100. And or your heart rate drops by about 10 beats a minute. So, and it's just because it takes the load off, because suddenly you're perfused with all this oxygen. And so your body doesn't, normally your heart's pumping blood to get oxygen to move through your body. Well, when you already have more oxygen than you could normally handle, it doesn't have to work as hard. So it just kind of, does the lazy pump. Yeah. And it feels great too, because you just suddenly feel like, I have energy.
I'm sure.
Actually, the single strangest thing about it, and this cracks me up, is if you work out and you're completely gassed, you're just totally winded, and you're like, and you're panting, and you drink this, and this is the only time I've ever had this happen, and it's such a bizarre feeling. You're drinking and you go,
and you just stop.
And it just stops, and you're no longer panting. You're just back to absolute baseline zero, and it's just,
wow.
What? Yeah, I'd never had that happen before that.
I could see some major benefits for athletes.
Oh yeah,
taking that too.
Yeah, instant shift in your VO2 max. I mean, you can train for your VO2 max, and you can maybe train for 3 months and maybe get like a 4 to 6% increase in it. But or you can drink it and get an instant, much larger boost. Yeah. Actually, I think it's going to be one of those things like for recovery. You see like NFL guys always having those oxygen bottles on the side. And this is so much better. And I know that firsthand, because when I was up here in Boulder, I was hiking around and I got one of those little oxygen bottles, and I was like, oh yeah, well, I'll try this out. And it's just spent really quickly, and it doesn't do much. And then you down the water and you're like, got like a 20, 30-minute runway of like feeling great.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it's interesting to me that you're able to stabilize that.
Yeah,
in a bottled state.
That was the trick. So it's kind of cool, because I had to overcome this thing called zeta potential, which is basically when the bubbles are normally in something, like if you carbonate something, the bubbles aggregate, they flow up to the top, and I was able to get it to stabilize, which is kind of cool, because if you take the bottle and you shake it, it's absolutely clear, and then it turns completely milky white.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's because the delocalizing of all the oxygen obfuscates the light path, and so you can't see through it anymore. And it looks just like milk. It's actually, I'll show you when we're done. I have a video of it.
All right, I have to give a quick shout out to Leela Quantum while we're here, because Ian's studies on this tech blew my mind, but using the tech over the past month turned me into a believer. I have the Leela Quantum Grand Block, the heel necklace, and the water bottle, and I am in love. The block has brought so much peace and tranquility to my home, in addition to its EMF harmonizing benefits. I wear this heel necklace every day, especially when I travel, to protect my energy field from EMFs. And I also use the water bottle to structure and harmonize my water when I'm on the go. I can literally taste the difference. So if you're curious to learn about Leela Quantum, be sure to check out my episode with Philip, which is linked below, and use my affiliate link to explore all of their amazing quantum wellness products. Okay, back to the episode.
And we were talking earlier about the potential benefits of drinking this oxygen water with methylene blue.
Yeah, I'm kind of a big fan of methylene blue. So, but in very small quantities. So, just maybe 2.5 milligrams and down, which sounds like an insanely small quantity, probably because it is an insanely small quantity. But sometimes when you get things that have a really high leverage, you don't need much, right? So I've done a couple of preparations recently using methylene blue, psilocybin, a couple of other things that for specific purposes, and it's sub-perceptual dosing of the psilocybin, because the effect that the psilocin, the active compound, actually has is really pronounced, and you can get, like, if you combine those things, you can get some really differing effects with people that have issues with serotonin and things like that. So yeah,
love that. And I'll have to tell you about the blue that I'm using later on, but yeah, so let's chat a little bit more about your work with Leela Quantum. And you're the scientific advisor for that company. You and Philip are friends. Just so happened to interview them back to back today, which is so fun. I was absolutely blown away by my conversation with Philip and what that company is doing, the power of that quantum technology. What is your role as the scientific advisor, and what do you see the future of that and happening?
So I come up with a lot of the tests and how to do it. It's almost like being the hired on naysayer, like, because one of the things is a lot of people throw the term quantum around, and it's always frustrating because for one, most people don't actually even know what quanta or quantum means. And they're, you're like, oh, look, quantum lollipops. And, people throw it around as a marketing term. But in this case, and that's one of the difficulties, is there's a differing lexicon of terms, right? So quantum in the sense of a quantum block is a little different than quantum in the sense of, if I were working on subatomic physics and we're talking about quanta, right? And looking at, photon effects or things like that, right? That's a different sort of thing than this is, but they use the same term, which makes everything a little cloudy. So I structure a lot of the experiments and try and come up with things and say, okay, look, if this is really the case, we have to validate it. We need to validate it, in preferably a double-blind, placebo-controlled way. So how do we do that experiment? How do we do a sham experiment? Like in the case of one thing that we're going to do with brain waves, my take was, okay, so if people see it, then maybe they'll think something that'll change their brainwave states. So let's get a sham block. So it's not charged. It doesn't open up any quantum energy. There's no flux around it. It's just a chunk of metal, right? And so then let's move that in the room, and then we'll gauge the brainwaves, for people with that and things like that, to just say, okay, I want to make sure that this is absolutely the pinnacle of scientific validation. So in the reality is, the stuff that we're working on is so out there that there's a lot of pushback, like, well, that can't possibly be. Yeah, generally speaking, I'm the guy who's giving the pushback about, yeah, that can't possibly be. But in this case, I feel like my job is to just hit it with a lot of very scientific rigor and say, okay, how can we test for this? How can we do, the positive and the negative tests on this? So we can look at, if this, then this, if not this, then not this, or then this, and just come up with a scenario where I can build an entire experiment experimental setup so that I can actually discern, is this what I'm being told it is? And so you have to approach it with a degree of skepticism at first. And it's funny because now, having done it so many times, you're like, well, damn, that did it too. Okay. And you get the results, and it's just kind of funny because you look at the data, and sometimes it's a little weird because you see these things, you go, okay, it worked 100% of the time. 100. Nothing works 100% of the time. And that's what's so strange, is because scientifically, when you look at most data, you just don't see that, right? That is not something that you see when you do a test or a trial. And to see that consistently, you kind of go, okay, well, pretty much 100% of the time when I drop something, it falls to the ground. Why? Because that's a fundamental force that we're being exposed to. And I would hypothesize that this is kind of the same thing. Working with a quantum field, it's such a fundamental thing.
Yes. Yep.
And I did an experiment. Philip actually called me a couple of years ago, and he may have mentioned this because it's on YouTube, but it's kind of this funny thing. And he said, listen, we're going to this conference. Can you do an experiment on stage to show people in real time that this isn't just some woo-woo thing, that it actually has a tangible effect? And I said, yeah, I'll come up with something. So I came up with the idea of knocking out histamine reactions in real time. And so one of the guys that we work with has this horrible shellfish allergy. And, gets hives, blows up, has to go to the hospital, EpiPen, the whole nine. And so I called him and said, hey, man, I'm doing this experiment, and I want to see if you could get a can of crab juice and we could do something to trigger a reaction. And he's such like the most trusting guy. I love this guy. Ends of the world. He goes like, what do you need me to put the crab juice on my eye? Which still makes me laugh. Like years later, I still laugh about that. I was like, no, what kind of sadistic? Like, really? Yeah, I'm going to make you put something that triggers a histamine reaction right in your eyes. Yeah. So I said, no, I got a better idea. So I got dermal rollers, which are the little, cylindrical rollers that have a little titanium pricks on the top that you roll it on your skin, and all those little things bop in you. And so it's basically like the old school dermal stamp test that you go to an allergist and they stamp you, and the allergens are laced on the needles, and you can see what affects and what does not affect you in terms of histamine reaction. So I derma rolled his arm and then put some crab juice in it from this can that I had opened, and on stage, and of course instant histamine reaction while it's on the arm. And then I put the can of the crab meat with the juice in the quantum block, and I lectured about waveform dynamics, because to me, after dealing with this, really what's happening is this entire place, you, me, everything here, everybody thinks they're real and solid, right? Because we express solidity. You can push on something and feel it push back. Well, actually, what you're perceiving is electron cloud repulsion. You're never actually going to come into contact with something. You're just pushing on its electron cloud. And so also, you're 99.9999% space. So really, if you put a pin in the ground and ran out another 60 feet and dropped another pin and then just drew a big circle, that's the distance between the nucleus of the atom and the first orbital shell. So it's and that the scale would be literally the size of a pin. So we are by far just a big amount of space, right? And so, but we're this pattern that's held together, in my way of thinking about it, via consciousness. So you have a coherence that expresses who you are through this pattern of interactions dynamically. And when I ask people to picture a wave, everybody kind of thinks of this, right? Well, truly, to me, there are about 28 different things that I can express to say, if I want to create something in tangible reality, it is going to have to be this. And so, you have a gradient, a chirality, there's a span, a pressure, there's a velocity, a vector, there's how compressed is it, what's the axial rotation. There's a whole host of things that are all waves, because they're really spheres that undulate. Yeah. And
like toroidal spheres?
Yes. Yeah. Well, the toroidal part comes in because of the interactive component, right? Because they're turning and they're rotating, and the pressure gradient moves. So it's really more like balls, but the ripple effect of all the energetics would be toroidal in nature. So you see all of this stuff kind of cascading through, and the outcropping of that is something manifest and tangible. But it has so many different components. To my understanding currently, it's about 20 different components that I could prattle off if I wanted to describe something. And you've got the standards like length, width, time, velocity, all that sort of stuff. But when you do that, you go, oh, so I can modulate a couple of these and make this really jive with your physiology, as opposed to really work outside of your physiology. Because in that waveform, things either clash and you get a destructive interference pattern, or they are harmonized and you get a constructive interference pattern. And so if you have a histamine reaction, it's because the histamine is a secondary function. Really what's going on is you're having a destructive interference pattern with the waveform that is at the substrate of that particular physical thing. So all I did was kind of sand out the waveform a little bit to make it more smooth and conducive to working. And so I took it out of the block and I derma rolled his other arm with a new derma roller, and then I put the crab juice in and nothing happened. And it's you can find the video, it's online, because literally every person in that audience kind of went, wrong? It was like a dog that had just heard a new sound. And after we talked, everybody came up to the stage to look at it, because it was so bizarre, because you could see, hives, nothing. But that's the thing, is we think that we're working on a physical level. We occur on a physical level, but we're actually trying to work on things that are the substrate below that, right? So, or really more to the point, like maybe 2 levels below that. Because that, as I had said earlier, when you affect something at its root, it cascades up. You propagate the wave becomes bigger. So the stone goes in, it's at the very center, which is where we're trying to exert physical influence. But then the ripples become larger and larger and larger. So things go from a quantum effect to a subatomic, to an atomic, to a molecular, to a biochemical. And then you see the outcroppings when it gets to that point. But we're just not quite really operating at that subtle level yet. Doesn't mean it isn't there. It just means at this particular point, in this century, we don't have the tech for it. And I always say that, like 400 years ago, if you said, look, you're sick, there are these little bugs that are inside your body and they're moving inside you, you're like, heretic.
I know. And now we're talking quantum level, even you really can't see it.
No,
not detectable
really can't see it,
by the human eye at all, at least like the germs. People are like, I can get a microscope and I can see it. Now we're going even smaller. And this really ties into what we were talking about earlier too, with your consciousness and your thoughts, and how all of that is affecting everything in your body on a physiological level, whether you want to agree with it or believe it or not. And even like with somebody that has an allergic reaction or a histamine reaction, to me, on some level, when they take on that belief of, I am allergic to crab or shellfish, and I am going to have an anaphylactic reaction, then that just like perpetuates that situation.
It does.
And that's energy. That's just your thoughts.
And it's very subtle too, because you can, for someone who has that allergic reaction, they don't have to know that they had it. They'll have, that an expression of anaphylaxis, whether they know it's in there or not. But because at a subtle level, they believe that. And if you can affect it at a subtle level, and this is where it starts to sound a little fringe for people in the sciences, but this has just been my experience. The subtle understanding of things informs the physical and tangible and gross understanding of things. And so if you have a subtle belief that you're allergic to something, you're allergic. And you don't have to know it's there, because your consciousness will pick it up. It's kind of like sensing people. There was an experiment at UT Austin a couple of years back where they took T-shirts, and it was an experiment about sexuality and sexual preference. And they had all these T-shirts, and they would have people rub sweat on the T-shirts.
Pheromones,
and they put them in jars. And what they realized was their olfaction was doing this thing called a macrohistocompatibility complex analysis, which is pretty fancy. Basically, the moment you smell somebody, you pick up their entire profile and look at their pheromones and look at their genetics and see whether you would be good at having offspring and whether it would be beneficial. And that happens in an instant, because you're doing a full spectral analysis, and olfaction is another one of those things people used to think, and probably a lot of people still do, because it generally takes a while for the science to catch up, that olfaction is something that occurs with a lock and key mechanism it's vibration, right? It's completely vibratory. That's all happening with quantum fluctuations in a field state. It's just the way it is.
I was just reading something where they were testing sending different natural scents through the air ducts at like a retirement community where some of the people were losing their memories. And they would send various scents that were essentially like essential oils, right? Through the air ducts, and they would send them for just 2 hours a day. And when they started doing this over just a few days' time, all of their memories started coming back. And they were able to start remembering their life, remembering where they were, remembering who their family was, because that scent and that smell was activating. And our scent is directly tied to our memories. But again, it's just, there's just something energetically happening there in the brain.
That's actually, I would love to read that research. I haven't seen it.
I'm trying to remember where. I think it was just like a random Instagram reel that,
Yeah, I'll check that out. That's actually
yeah.
fascinating. I know that there's been a lot of research done with music to stimulate memory function, and it's beautiful. Actually, it's kind of amazing the things you can do. I had both of my parents write down by decade their favorite songs for their entire life.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, well, because I figured at some point, if dementia sets in or Alzheimer starts to set in, and the older they get, the more probable that is, that I'd be able to help roll them back with more rapidity just by virtue of playing the songs that had emotional impact to them at some point in their life.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. Well, I have just loved this conversation.
My pleasure.
With you. It has been so fun, so enlightening. If you guys weren't aware, this is literally a wizard scientist that I'm sitting here with. I'm sure you could tell just the level of brilliance and intelligence and curiosity, I think, is really what drives it. Yep.
Very much so.
And we will have all of his links to Wizard Sciences and his C60 products in the show notes and the description below. Be sure to find him on all the social media platforms. I'm sure this actually won't be the last time that I have you on, because we could talk about all kinds of quantum stuff and David Hawkins for hours on end.
Yeah.
But we have an event to get to.
We do.
And so thank you so much.
My pleasure, Stef. Truly.
Until next time.
This chat was super enlightening. I invite you to share this episode with someone else who might enjoy it. I hope you learned something new and were introduced to new tech and supplements maybe you hadn't heard of before. I have personally been using the Leela Quantum block, heel necklace, and water bottle, as well as taking Neural RX from Wizard Sciences, and I love all of these products. You can find all of Ian's links and my affiliate links and codes in the show notes and description below. 10 out of 10 recommend. Be sure to subscribe to Quantum Conversations and leave a review so we can all discover a new dimension of wellness together.